And this turned out to be one Mr. Victor Helu, who was at the time, he was a Broadway chorus boy and understudy for Broadway productions. And he's also had a small photography business. He was a relatively young man. He's 83, 84 right now, and he lives about 3 miles from where I'm talking to you right now in a condominium here in St. Pete Beach, Florida, St. Petersburg, Florida area. What the woman did is she gave me Victor's card, and I phoned him, and I said I was very interested in the prints that were on display, but those were like cheap photocopies that I guess Victor thought. It's realized Victor's very old and has some different ideas than a lot of us about business and how things were going and what they might be worth. At the time, he was very unaware of what he had might just be worth. And I thought that this is something very, very valuable. Almost inconceivable that somebody had been not only he was at the rehearsal and backstage and just about everywhere that Miss Monroe had been during the event, and he had free license to take photographs of the entire event. And I met with him in front of the thrift store, and I told him I really wasn't interested in the photocopies that were on display at the thrift store, but I was interested in original photographs. And at that time, we struck up somewhat of a friendship, and he invited me to his condominium to view, some photographs and other items he had for sale, which was included the book. It was a self-published book. I think you know what the title. You did some research. I can't remember what the title of his book was.
I believe it's called Happy Birthday, Mr. President, or something along those lines. It's in that YouTube video I made, so I can definitely go back and research it. But I believe the title's something similar to that, yes.
And the book was very self-published. It wasn't very professionally done. It looked like he had photocopied several pages of different texts and photographs and cut and pasted them in himself, and he found somebody to bind them, and I think he had a few hundred made, or maybe 100 made at one time, and he thought he was going to make a bunch of money on these things, selling them, I think, for like $50 a pop. But I was interested in the original images more than anything. And when he met me in his condominium in the hallway there, he brought down a whole basket full of photographs of Marilyn Monroe, other stars. He had studio cards of actresses like Hedy Lamarr, Greta Garbo, Veronica Lake. I bought some of those from him. I bought 7 images of Marilyn Monroe, and it was just like fascinating. He had more, but he didn't have them published, and he had some of his own that he wasn't selling, but he was able to show them to me, like Marilyn Monroe and Jack Benny at the rehearsal. And that's what's really interesting about Victor's career, was that he was like a singer, and he sang, in the chorus for Broadway productions. He also was an understudy for The King and I, and the man from La Mancha, I think. And the guy still sings like he has the voice of a 24, 25-year-old man, and he doesn't forget a word. He has a hard time finding his way around the neighborhood in a car, but he doesn't miss a single lyric to any Broadway show tune that he's familiar with, and he sings very well.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Very amazing. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and he's a great guy. And at one time, I have a friend, Miss Angie Fox, and she is a big fan of Marilyn Monroe's, and she was so taken with the images. I gave her one for her birthday several years ago, and she was so taken with this that she just had to meet Victor. And she met Victor, and she was very impressed with him, and she has some connections in mass media, and she asked a movie producer to meet with him, and we all had lunch, and we discussed Victor's career, and then we actually went back to his condominium and went upstairs to his condo, and from that time era, it looks like he had come across just about everybody that was anybody at the time, like Barbara Streisand, Elizabeth Taylor, and Richard Burton, Eddie Fisher. Of course, these are names that go along with people that were like very famous, like very, very long time ago, like 60, 70 years ago. But they're the equivalent, I guess, of some of the people you see in People magazine these days. On the cover.
Right. Uh-huh.
They were extremely. They defined the era. They defined what a star was, and Victor had come across. He either knew these people or had photographed them. He had photographed Barbara Streisand on her 21st birthday. I was just absolutely amazed at his apartment, which was filled with photographs of his career in Broadway. And he's had an incredible story. He sold me the 7 images. I had him initial and number them, for absolute, clarification that these came from the photographer. These are the last images that are ever going to be published from the negative. His family and his estate lawyer have made him lock them up. As far as he's been very evasive about their plans for them, I guess he's been told to do so by his family's lawyer. I believe that he's got some nephews that are looking to cash in once he's deceased, on the treasure that he's got of photographs and negatives, and he's been told to be quiet. But he sold the images to me before he had that limitation put on him, and I'm very lucky to have gotten them. And he's got a lot of other stuff, and I bought some of those comp cards from the wartime comp cards of Greta Garbo and stuff like that from him. And I really treasure the images. I really, I've got one framed here that I don't intend to sell, but the other ones I'm looking to maybe sell. But the important thing to me in image collecting, and there is such a thing as people that collect rare images. And I was told a long time ago by a man. I actually had some Led Zeppelin images for sale at a gallery down the street here that I had come across, and is to have these things numbered and initialed by the actual photographer, which makes them more marketable. And that's
absolutely.
Right. And so what's really important about the images is that Victor did take the time to come down and initial and number them, and they are the very last ones that will ever be sold to the public. He's had, attempts to, mass market them before, and they never really had the right marketing ploy, and it sort of failed for him. And the book, like I said, it's a published book, but it's a self-published book, and it's very non-professional. And I think I think he has plans to go to a more professional publisher and have a book published about the event with his images in it.
Dan, if you were to give us a ballpark estimate as to the approximate value of these images, where would you put that figure?
Well, it's kind of a difficult thing because, Marilyn Monroe collectors usually have, a serious Marilyn Monroe collector has to have everything, that they could possibly get their hands on. So in some respects, it would be priceless to them. To the general market, I'd say somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 an image. The ones that come directly from his darkroom, I'd say, and I think you've seen the square ones, the smaller of the two. Actually were probably developed by him in his own darkroom in 1962. There's another set of 8x10s that look like they were developed later on in the 20th century, and I don't know where and when he had those developed. But having been an image collector myself, I can obviously see the what they call the negative smudge in the corners, 4 corners of the smaller images. And if you've ever seen a very valuable photograph, what image collectors like to see is they like to see the evidence that the negative's been taken out of that special solution they use and put on the paper, and that usually leaves a little bit of a smudge in the corners. Or you can even, if people that in this day and age are probably not real familiar with because of digital photographers aren't familiar with the photograph process of development of film. I mean, I know it's kind of a genre that's gone out the door, in the last 20 years. But you probably can remember the old Kodak film, right? With you get a roll of film, and it has those little holes on each side for the camera to loop around, right? And a lot of your more, a lot of image collectors like to even see that. They like to see that the negative, even the outside of the negative, put on the paper. And I learned this from the gentleman that was marketing my Led Zeppelin photographs down the road at his rock and roll museum here in St. Petersburg. Told me, that these are some of the things that make an image more marketable. It's definitely having the photographer sign them and what number them is one thing. Evidence that they came right from the negative is another thing. And these increase the value of the image at any given time.
Fantastic, Dan. This is a true treasure. This is a very rare find, and from a very historic night, President Kennedy's birthday, the evening when Marilyn Monroe sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President." I understand Victor Helu shared some anecdotes, some stories with you. Could you share with our listeners some of the anecdotes that Victor shared with you?
Oh, yeah. There's a pretty good story about when she came into rehearsal the first day, Jack Benny, and, unfortunately probably a lot of people don't know who. I'm just barely old enough to remember Jack Benny. Jack Benny mentioned to Miss Monroe that he said, it looks like you've been putting on a little bit of weight. And Marilyn Monroe said, not anywhere but my breast. You want to see? And according to Victor, she started to act like she was going to remove her top. And that really stunned Jack Benny. And he said, no, not here, not right now. And, so to tease him a little bit. He also told me that the gown was absolutely see-through and almost scandalous for us in 1962 to have worn a gown that was absolutely showed her nude flesh through it was absolutely stunning and nearly scandalous. And if you've ever heard a recording on YouTube, it's all over YouTube, of her singing it in that vampy voice, "Happy Birthday, Mr. President."
Yes.
You can imagine the shock of the public with this see-through gown and this woman singing, in this sexy, alluring voice to the President of the United States. One of the more significant things is that Jackie Onassis Kennedy did not attend the event because at the time JFK and Marilyn were having an affair. And she was so upset by the fact that Marilyn Monroe was going to be singing at the birthday party that she declined to attend. So that was one significant thing that history shows that she did not accompany JFK to that party. Some of the more other famous people that you'll see in the images are Peter Lawford, who was instrumental, and he was married to a Kennedy family. He was an in-law of John Kennedy's, and he was instrumental in introducing Marilyn to the Kennedy brothers, Robert and John. And he's in the images. There's a man named Mr. Blackwell that appears in the images, and he at one time used to do the 10 best and 10 worst dressed women in Hollywood list every year. I don't know if anybody out there is old enough to remember Mr. Blackwell and whether he mattered or not, but yeah, he is definitely appears in a couple of the images that I have, along with Peter Lawford, and I do have one of the day of the rehearsal with Jack Benny. There are other people like I think Jimmy Durante's definitely there, and you can't miss that big nose and hat, and several other stars attended the event. It was like one of the more star-studded galas ever held at Madison Square Garden at the time. And so Victor was privileged to all this, backstage, chicanery and stuff, and he had a good time with it, obviously. And as the years went by, he began to see the significance of what had happened and what he really had been able to participate in.
The irony of this, Dan, is that was President Kennedy's birthday in May of '62, and within just a few months, August of '62, Marilyn would be found dead. And has been some question from time to time. There's books and documentaries out that call into question whether it was, in fact, an accidental death or a suicide, or if there was some sort of a cover-up. But there's a number of theories. There was, in fact, supposedly a diary which Marilyn kept that came up missing, and there may even be some indication that Peter Lawford was there near Marilyn's place not too long before she passed away. You may be able to weigh in on some of this, Dan. Could you tell us a little about all of this?
Yeah, I looked that up, and there's a lot of confusion surrounding the whole thing. Peter Lawford, I think he was aware that she was ill that night. But you have to realize that Marilyn Monroe had been suffering for several weeks, if not months, with mental illness. She had been committed at one time to an institution and put in with some very, very ill people that she really wasn't that ill that she had to be put in with the raging psychotics. They made a mistake, and Joe DiMaggio, her former husband, had went and rescued her and had her put in an award that was for people that were borderline. They weren't quite as bad off, and she was suffering very bad. She was under contract to finish a picture. I think it was called The Misfits, if I'm not mistaken. There was another picture I think she was involved in too, and the studio eventually had to sue her for non-breach of contract because she just couldn't get her act together long enough to film a full-length film at that time. She suffering severe depression, and she was taking barbiturates as prescribed for a long time. And one of the more significant things I read is that the suicide, they're calling it, the two different schools of thought, that accidental suicide or suicide. Obviously, she was well versed in the taking of the barbiturates she was prescribed. She knew how much to take and at what time. And in the autopsy that was originally done, they found an exorbitant amount of barbiturates in her stomach, which implied that she had taken a whole handful in a gulp. So it seems like it was an intentional suicide, that she had been extremely depressed. And there have been a lot of people over the years, with conspiracy theory. One of them being that Robert Kennedy also had an affair with Marilyn, and she was known to call the Kennedys and threaten them. She called Jackie Kennedy and threatened her, and she told Marilyn that she could have the no-good SOB, basically. And she supposedly called Robert Kennedy and threatened to expose the affairs with both him and his brother. And that led to a lot of thinking that possibly that Robert Kennedy had her assassinated on purpose to keep her quiet. But there's been a lot of proof to the contrary over the decades. And of course, America has fascination with certain people that doesn't seem to die with time. Marilyn Monroe being one of the more iconic. We have Elvis Presley. John Kennedy himself is an icon that doesn't ever seem to the American public never seems to lose interest in the Kennedy story, or in the Monroe story. And people are fascinated with these people for some reason. And after doing a lot of research, some people even wanted to go so far as saying that Jimmy Hoffa did this, the leader of the Teamsters, to get revenge on Robert Kennedy, who was one of his mortal enemies at the time. And after doing a lot of research, it just seems like it was what it was. I think it was a suicide. I think that her problems were so grave, and her